This is Justin O'Crahor here from the Biomedical Engineering Division. I'm the chair, the outgoing chair at the end of this year. And Johnny Chu has agreed to give us a very interesting personal presentation of how he ended up in biomedical engineering, even though his early career and studies and so on were not specifically in that area. So because his presentation and his CV, if you like, is part of what we're going through. I'm not going to go into much detail now, but I can tell you that it's very interesting. He's done a lot in a relatively short time, and he's got some very interesting technical presentations to make to us. So, Johnny, do you want to take over?
Yes, Justin, thank you. Cool. So just before I start, I just want to thank you, Justin, for giving me the opportunity to work with Engineers Ireland. It's a big honor, and I've always wanted to work with Engineers Ireland and to be here. It's a pleasure and an honor. So yeah, just for today's agenda, I'm just going to go through my personal journey, and then at the end, if we have any questions and answers, we can go through that as well. So just to begin, I just want to talk through my personal journey and just kind of describe what I kind of had to go through and just kind of address any concerns that people may have trying to come from, like, if they're coming from mechanical and they want to go into biomedical R&D engineering. And so just through this talk, I'm going to just go through my education, my professional experience, my CPD, and just kind of go through some of the experiences and projects that I've worked on, that I've worked in both orthopedic, cardiovascular, as well as vascular, and just to kind of show that it is possible to transition from mechanical to biomedical R&D engineer. So education and experience. I graduated back in 2014 with a bachelor's and master's in engineering in manufacturing and mechanical engineering. I later went on to do a diploma in advanced polymer materials, and I'm due to finish up my master's in advanced polymers in TUS, also known as AIT in Athlone. I've also done a certificate in regulatory and operations in collaboration with ATU and NUIG in Galway. And next year, I'll be continuing on working with regulatory and quality next year to progress that certificate. Now, both of these are important because polymers are very important, specifically in the west of Ireland, because a lot of medical devices use a lot of polymers in their devices. And just regulatory is important as well, because it kind of gives you the groundwork and the paperwork that's required to kind of drive projects. And a lot of time projects don't include them early enough, and you get like bottlenecks in production. So it'd be of benefit to any starting engineers to kind of consider more courses after they finish their main degree. I'm also enrolled in a master's in business at the moment, but that's due to start next year. In terms of my professional development, I have completed my Lean Six Sigma Black Belt this year, and I've also completed 4 certificates in the Adobe Certified Professional Program. So that covered Photoshop, InDesign, Illustrator, as well as InDesign. In terms of my professional experience, my first job was in medical field was in Signature Orthopedics, and they are orthopedic company. They focus from anything from knee implants, stems, hips, cups, spinal cages, as well as the full package in terms of medical tools to fixate the device and implant the device itself. So I worked in Signature Orthopedics for 2 years, and I worked on a various number of projects. After that, I moved to Galway, where I worked in Medtronic for a year as a research and development engineer, and I worked in a few vascular projects. And then after that, I moved to Origin Medical, where I was, again, currently a research and development engineer, and we're working on a vascular device. So this kind of ties us nicely into the first section, the first project that I worked on in orthopedics. So the first project I would have worked on was a hip replacement implant in Signature Orthopedics. For those who are unfamiliar, a hip replacement is used to replace the hip. So generally what happens is, as you age, generally around in your 70s, either 2 things can happen. Your cartilage can degrade and it can't be replaced, or your bone gets reabsorbed, particularly the femur. It's usually the neck or the ball in the hip and ball socket joint, shown here. So what happens is it can be quite painful for patients to walk around. And what this device does is it replicates that function and restores that function for the patient, so they can walk around freely without having to feel the pain of not being able to walk around. So this device that we worked on, we wanted to ensure that it had like it was more robust compared to our competitors. It had improved bone cohesion, because a lot of what you do find is one of the major failure modes is that stems generally can fall out if they don't get enough bone adhesion. And then secondly, to ensure that it addresses a range of audiences. So we had a large range sizes, from like size 1 to 9, which addressed a lot of different sizes for large population size. And this was our final product. So we had our cup system. This would sit inside the acetabular cup to replace any bone that was destroyed. We have our liner, our ultra high weight molecular polyethylene liner, and then we had our metal ball component, which slotted into our stem. So this was the flagship stem that we were working on. And as you can see, it's coated with hydroxyapatite, and it's a kind of like a calcium compound. And what it is, it's a very porous material, and it allows, once you've implanted it into the femur, it allows bone to kind of ingrow into that particular section, allowing for more bone adhesion. And what's so special about this design is if you take cross section of this bone, this stem, it's quite rectangular. So what you're able to do is you're able to transfer the loads more evenly across the stem, as well as allowing it to grip onto the bone, surrounding bone material, which is perfectly what you want. So how does this kind of like bridge the gap between mechanical and biomedical engineering? From my experience, I found that a lot of skills I picked up in college, I was able to apply immediately in the job. So this concepts such as statics, solid mechanics allowed you to kind of analyze the forces that the patient would have experienced during their gait cycle, as well as any forces that would go through the actual implant, and then you'd be able to calculate the loads and stresses. In terms of skill sets, we did a lot of sketching. Kind of communication was a big one. We worked with a lot of surgeons, and we kind of communicate our ideas back and forth. Then we would proceed on to 3D modeling, where we'd model it up in SolidWorks, and we'd 3D print it to give kind of a prototype for a visual effect, to see what it looked like, how it feel. And finally, FEA was a huge one. That was very important, because you want to be able to calculate the forces inside the femur. So typically bone gets reabsorbed if it doesn't reach the right threshold of pressure. So usually it has to be above 40 megapascals. So the FEA allowed us to determine just to ensure that we had like an even loading across the entire segment. And that's another reason why this is so special, because it's tapered. So you could see that it was evenly distributing the load like a wedge almost. So that was the first project we worked on. Now, the second project we worked on was a knee joint replacement. Again, this was with Signature Orthopedics. For anyone not familiar, generally your knee is comprised of your femur, which is the top bone in your leg. Yeah, you have your cartilage, which are the little slippery substance that allows for frictionless movement at the end of those bones, and then it's connected to your tibia. Now, again, just like the hip replacement, as you age, generally what happens is cartilage is unable to repair itself. So what happens is when you're growing up, your cartilage lays down extracellular matrix via chondrocytes, and once that's formed, that's it for life. It doesn't have any blood vessels, so it can't perform angiogenesis. It can't lay down more blood vessels and repair itself. And so as you age, the more you wear it down, the more it gets damaged, and then you get bone on bone friction. And patients get delivered, they get encapsulated, so they can't move because of the pain. And so the aim of the knee joint replacement is to try and again replace this joint and to allow the patient to move freely again without that pain. So the main aim of this product was to improve the wear characteristic, and by doing this, we tried to increase the surface area of the condyles. So these are the condyles here of the product. Another design issue we wanted to address was that we wanted to make sure that it was universally designed. So rather than designing two individual condyle components, we wanted to make them symmetrical, so you could be used for both left and right legs. And by doing this, we drastically reduced the number of instruments that was required to implant these implants. So typically, an implant would require, I'd say, between 20 to 30 instruments to cut, incise, insert, and fixate the device. But by doing so, we reduced it down to like 15 device instruments that was required. just to give you insight. So this is our final product. This was the tibia plate. So this would sit on top of your tibia. Then we had our femoral component. This would slot into your tibia, or tibia. And then you had your polyethylene component, typically made of ultra-high molecular weight polyethylene. And this is the component that allows frictionless movement. So again, you can see that it's symmetrical. So this can be used for left and right legs. Same with the tibia plate. It has a really large condyle surface. And just from our studies, we found that that gave you very frictionless and minimal wear on the components. So just kind of going back, again, similar to the STEM, how can we relate this back to biomedical engineering if you're coming straight from mechanical? It's very, very applicable. You had to apply biomechanics, you had to use dynamics, kinematics to kind of determine the gait cycle, and from the gait cycle, what the forces were being loaded through the body. And from that, we could determine what our design inputs were in terms of how thick we should design certain components, how much stress it had to undergo. Other things that was applicable for mechanical engineering was the manufacturing process. So how would these components have been made? So for this instance, these would have been brought in. They would have been casted with extra thickness. We would have brought them in, and then we'd shave off the excess components or material until we got the finer details. So in order to do that, you'd have to consider design for manufacturing, DFM, and we do this via SolidWorks and just working with the machine shop to kind of gauge how machinable these components were. So again, you've probably seen from these two projects, there's great overlap between the two sectors, biomedical and manufacturing, and you could probably go into either sector if you wanted to. So the next sector that I worked into was the cardiovascular. So this was the time I spent in Medtronic. And in Medtronic, I worked on the occlusion balloon. Now, the reason you need an occlusion balloon is, I'll explain that in a second, but generally, as people age, it's either due to stress, lack of exercise, or a poor diet. You may get a buildup of plaque in your arteries, and what can happen is this plaque can get thicker and thicker until you get a constriction and then potentially blockage, which prevents the flow of blood, which delivers oxygen and nutrients to the organ that needs it, and you subsequently could get organ failure or a heart attack. And in this particular instance, I was in the cardiovascular group, so we had to develop an implant to address the particular challenges in the right coronary artery and the anterior interventricular artery, which are typically 1 millimeter or less. And this met the target, the market, because generally on the market, balloons range from 1 millimeter and up. So they're unable to kind of traverse these challenging arteries. And this is why this device was so special that we were working on. It was one of the first 1 millimeter occlusion balloons. It was able to traverse through very tortuous paths. It would have to go through the femoral artery, up the aortic arch, and then through the coronary artery or the anterior interventricular artery. And also, in order to do that, it had to have high torqueability, pushability, as well as trackability. And this was incorporated into our design. So this was our design here. We had a dual lumen core. So it basically has 2 lumens running through the core. It has a thin film 1 millimeter diameter balloon, and that's used to push the plaque out or to put a stent on it to help maintain the passage after it's been opened up. And it has 2 radiopathic indicators, so you can see it on CT scans during operation. Again, in terms of its construction, it has mechanical core, which allows it to flex at certain components, and it's quite flexible. So just in terms of how you relate this back to mechanical engineering, we had to, in terms of theory, we had to use a lot of fluid mechanics because we wanted to calculate and just to make sure that the fill time wasn't too long, because these passages can be quite narrow. And so if you take too long to fill a passage, you can artificially block the passage of blood and oxygen in the vessels, which isn't a good thing. The other things that we had to focus on was polymer science. So just in terms of the choice of materials. So when you're trying to assemble the components, you had to make sure that the polymers were able to be melted or molded together. if you didn't have the right material, they either wouldn't bond properly, you'd get leakages, and then that's a hazard for the patient as well. And just in terms of the skill sets, fixture development, you'd have to, in my instance, I would have developed a lot of pucks from nylon. You'd machine out a little track, and you'd try and push these through to kind of measure the pushability, the trackability, as well as the torqueability. So you try and rotate them. And then that would lead nicely into mechanical testing. You'd kind of get familiar with like Zwick testing. You do that in college already. And then from that data, you'd analyze it with Minitab or R to kind of give you data. So again, all very transferable skills, just in case anyone's worried if they won't get a job in biomedical engineering after mechanical engineering in college. Finally, so this is the last project which I'm currently working on, hopefully not the last for myself. So this is a left atrial appendage occluder, and it's one of Origin's flagship devices. And I'll explain what it does in a second, but just kind of give you a bit of background as to why we need it. So a normal heart, when it beats, you hear a lub dub, and what actually happens is you get an electrical signal from the sinus node. It goes down into the AV node, and what happens during that time is the atriums contract, push the blood into the ventricles. The electrical signal then flows down to the ventricles. It contracts, these contract, and they push the blood out of the heart, so that you get that lub dub effect. But during atrial fibrillation, what you get is the electrical signals get mixed up. You get a chaotic signal throughout the entire muscles. And so all these muscles all contract at different rates at different times, and it's very chaotic. And you get a thing called arrhythmia. So what happens is the blood pressure is very low, the blood isn't pushed out uniformly, and what you can get is stagnation of blood. And that can be a dangerous thing. And the main reason is in this chamber here, the left atrium, there is a pouch called the left atrial appendage, and because of the low blood flow, what ends up happening is blood can pool up inside that and stagnate, forming a clot. So it can either flow out eventually, and it can block the arteries, causing an aneurysm or a heart attack, or even a stroke. And that's why this device is important. This device allows us to mechanically isolate, well, it'd be the first device, and the only device on the market to mechanically isolate this chamber, as well as to electrically isolate it. So it'll destroy all the unnecessary nerves causing the arrhythmia. Additionally, it's the first device ever to use a mechanical handle. So it'll give you precision when you're trying to deploy the device into the chamber. Typically, all the devices at the moment are hand maneuvered, and there's a lot of variability when you're using the device. And then lastly, the last feature is that the implant is quite unique. It's independent of the anchors, whereas a lot of devices at the moment, they would be one single unit. So just to give you an idea of what it looks like. So you have your implant here, your anchoring system. What you do is you feed it through the aortic, through the femoral, through the landing zone and into the actual LAA. You release it. No, sorry, you ablate it. You destroy the nerves. You release it. And then over time, what happens is a thin layer of skin forms on top of it, sealing off the chamber completely. So you've electrically and mechanically isolated that chamber. And again, this relates all to mechanical engineering. You have, when you're developing your device, you're doing your tolerance stack-ups, so you're making sure all your components fit together. You're generating your prints, making sure that you have your prints, your 3D models, so you can send to your vendors. You're prototyping it, and then testing it on the bench to make sure everything fits, aligns. And also just your knowledge of materials is very important, because different materials will act differently with others. You get corrosions, pitting. You can also just making sure that they're compatible with each other and with the body as well. So that's important. And then also documentation control. So that's where a lot of like regulatory and quality would play into this as well. But those would be the four kind of main projects I would have worked on. And from my experience, I would see no issue with anyone coming out of mechanical engineering to be able to work as an R&D and bioengineer. Might not have been able to dive too deeply in any of these projects, but if you have any further questions, like please feel free to contact me via my number or my email, or even via LinkedIn. That would be great. And if I can be of assistance in terms of your career going forward, like please don't be afraid to contact me. Jason, I'm just wondering, do you have any questions lined up or?
Yeah, I see one question is coming. Maybe it's a good time. Thanks very much for the presentation, because as always, these things are really interesting. I see a couple of questions are coming, but if anyone has anything that they'd like to add, please put them into the Q&A and I'll read them out to Johnny. The first one we have here is, what type of modeling software is used in the biomedical industry?
That's a very, very good question. So typically, generally, if it's not biomedical, it would be like ProEng or Creo for Europe and SolidWorks for America. But for what I've found so far, it's usually SolidWorks for the biomedical industry. But you do sometimes get Creo as well. I know Siemens do their own 3D modeling software, like NX or something like that. That's another package, but that's specific to Siemens. There's also free CAD and stuff like that, but they're more like for hobbyists and stuff like that. So I wouldn't worry too much about them. So SolidWorks and Creo would be the main ones.
Yeah, and can I ask you, Johnny, what's the main pro and con of those products?
So if you're using SolidWorks, it's very powerful, but it tends to crash if it gets too complicated, like meshes or like interfaces. Whereas Pro-E would be more stable. You can use like surfacing. Surfacing is like a technique to generate models. You get like more, you can handle more meshes without the program crashing. And like you've probably heard this before already. It's just more stable of a program. So that's what I know of it, anyways.
Okay, very good.
Hmm.
And I have a couple of questions of my own, actually. One of them, you mentioned that with the knee replacement, that by not having right and left options there, it reduced drastically the number of tools. But I didn't catch what was the sort of key point. I would have expected it to be maybe half of the range, instead of having right and left, you'd have one version or something like that. So why, could you explain that to me again, why it makes it easier to use them?
So let's just go up here for a second. So I guess it's easier just to explain. So generally, left and right require kind of different cutting blocks. So you usually have to make. I wonder if I can go up to. I'll show you here. Here we go. So you see the way you see these cuts here.
Yeah.
So most medical device companies would knee products would have those kind of prescribed cuts, and in order to achieve them, you'd have like cutting blocks. So you would have to attach them on to your the femur, to a fixture onto your femur, and you make a cut, take the cutting block off, add another block to make that cut, take that block off, put another block to make that cut, and so on and so forth until you've achieved that full cut. Now, if it's usually they're asymmetrical, so the shape will be different. So you'll have another set. So let's say this required 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 kind of cuts. The left side would require another 6 different cutting blocks shapes. So by having them symmetrical, you've drastically reduced you reduce that amount. That's just one example.
Yeah. So I mean, if that's so, why, the way you describe it there, it makes sense. So why haven't people tumbled to that before? Was there something that prevented earlier versions or other manufacturers from doing this?
So like it would have been like pretty standard to separate the left and right and just keep them separate. So it would have been like an industry standard, but it's kind of becoming more mainstream now to have them symmetrical. So like you see a lot of brands with symmetrical knees.
So what I'm hearing from you is that you actually cut the end of the bone so it has sort of flat surfaces, and then you've got something to stick that metal part onto. And then
Yes.
the metal part works very well against this. I don't know what material did you say that one was?
Polyethylene. Yeah.
It's polyethylene, is it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then people can walk again.
Yes. Yeah.
Very good. Very good. Very good. Yeah.
And
Okay.
they're usually made of like a ultra high molecular weight polyethylene. So that way it can resist more wear and tear.
That's pretty good. That's very good.
Mm.
So there's a couple of other questions coming in here now. One of them actually goes back to the first one, so maybe I'll take it first. Was that the respondent here saying, I'm learning CATIA 3D experience. Do I need to switch to SolidWorks?
I would say keep going. And then I tried and pick it up on, like, you can definitely pick up SolidWorks on the job. But it's like once you kind of know one really well, usually you can transfer across to another software very easily. And and this goes for like, Jason, you probably know this yourself, like languages, like once you learn one like English or French, they're kind of like the mechanics are similar. It's just the interface is different. So that kind of makes sense. I hope that answers their question.
Absolutely.
But I would definitely, if you have the time, pick up SolidWorks. But if not, keep going with CADIA, and then if you have more time, pick up SolidWorks after.
Okay, very good. And we have another question here. It's quite long, but it's very interesting. So I'll read it all out. I'm a biomedical engineering student who's finishing up the master's soon. I've focused a lot on the electronic side of biomedical, such as signal processing, circuits and coding, as well as doing fluids, solids, and other mechanical subjects in college. It seems like there's a good mix of electro and mechanical in the project you're working on at the moment. That's to yourself, Johnny. And is it possible for a biomedical engineer to go into a job like this straight from college? I've 8 months experience in Medtronic quality and R&D departments. What would you say to this to this contribution?
Yes, absolutely. Like, I think particularly if you're going to a startup, they would definitely want to. They'd consider you for sure, definitely, because they need people with different skill sets and be able to wear different hats. But the only caveat of that would be that time is a huge pressure when you're working on these projects. So you'd kind of have to be sure you know your stuff and just kind of progress, like prototype quickly, so you can cycle through the prototypes to get to a solution. Now it's more difficult in a larger company, because generally when you first come out, they're going to give you like an R&D 1 role or 2 role. So you wouldn't be given as much responsibilities or like variety of roles. Whereas if you were in a startup, so like absolutely, you would be able to kind of do stuff like that for sure. I wouldn't discount that. Like,
yeah, I mean, that sounds very exciting compared to the way it was, as they say, in my time, when
wow.
the opportunities were far less. Yeah. So if I could come back, there's another question that I've got on the messages coming in here. Do we have to go into the design field itself? What's the scope for manufacturing in biomedical? A mixed design and planning and stuff. Neither is pure technical nor pure management. It seems to be a bit of a mixture.
And again, that kind of depends on what the individual wants to specialize in. So if you want to go into pure management roles, you would kind of maybe do a cert or course in terms of management, and you'd kind of help manage projects like scrums and sprints and stuff like that. Or if you wanted to kind of help with laying out the plant factory floor, you'd kind of go, you'd probably be an industrial designer or industrial engineer. It really depends on what your degree is and what you're interested in when you're applying for the job. So, but you can definitely move laterally across the ladders when you're in the company. I've never heard any issues about it. It's just a matter of timing and opportunity. That would be my answer.
Okay, so maybe I could come in a bit on that, Johnny.
Yes, please.
Because I've another technical question I'd like to bring up, but just your own experience. What I'm seeing there is that there's taking just from your own career there, that you had quite a wide variety of different topics at the beginning, different colleges you went to and different degrees you signed up for, and then technical. For example, you had the how you use the 3D designers and things like that, and then you went into a number of different companies. What's your cut on that? Is that a good way to do it, to have a lot of experience? Because in the older days, people used to, they studied one thing and they went into one company and they might move 5, 10 years later or something. But you seem to have had a much faster turnover.
Well, I'm not going to lie. I think the first 2 years out of college, I kind of fumbled around for a bit. So I wouldn't, if anyone's doing that, I wouldn't feel guilty if you're lost. It's such a huge feel. Yeah, exactly. You're right. But I think it's important to remember that experience is gold. It's more important than degrees. I think like you do get a lot of knowledge and it is very applicable. But from what I've seen, people often kind of prefer experience over like people like myself who have like degrees and certs and stuff. So if possible, go into industry, work like 1 or 2 years, see how you feel, see what the gap is. Like maybe there's a gap in the market, or there's something that you want to do personally. So if you figured, you're going as a design engineer, you're kind of lacking in material knowledge, maybe do a course in polymers. Or if you don't know about enough about regulatory, how certain things are passed, why certain things are done, why certain regulatories is this way, or like why you should design certain things this way. maybe regulatory might be a good route. Just do a course on it, not necessarily go into regulatory roles. And you can always pivot. Like even if you do that, finish the course, and you finished it, and you don't like it, you still gotten the experience and the degree, so it will help you later down the line. Is because everything is cumulative. So I would never regret doing something. Just don't stay stagnant. That's my only advice, because like time is like
that's how you learn. Yeah. I could come in with some comments of my own.
these.
There's another question that has come in here. Do you recommend any specific courses after college or any specific experience to make you stand out?
I would say, if I'm going to be totally honest, I think maybe taking for me, I think taking a year out, maybe traveling for a bit first would be good. But if that's not an option, definitely do like apply for an internship at a startup, because you can learn so much there, so much more. In my experience, that's all. But and then I think Springboard is like a valuable, very valuable resource. So you can apply for courses there and pay for like fraction of the cost. Just do some. Always keep learning would be my suggestion.
Yeah, very good. So, if I can, I'd like to go back to one or two of the technical issues that had caught my eye as you were going through again. So,
Yes.
you said that the occlusion balloon was very special, but again, tell me again why it was special. You went through it, talking to experts. So, take me through that a little. Again, why is it special? What you did there?
Mm-hmm. So I think the two aspects of it. Specifically, its size, just because you typically in occluder balloons come in sizes larger than 1 millimeter in diameter.
Okay.
So this balloon is 1 millimeter, and
1 millimeter and smaller, is that right?
and there's like a matrix for like smaller sizes. You're right. Yeah, absolutely, you're right. So that's able to go through tortuous kind of smaller diameter arteries or capillaries that like conventional devices on the market currently can't do. The other benefit of this device is that it's torqueability. So you're able to rotate this device. It has high pushability. You're able to push it, and you're able to track it. So it's able to go through very tortuous components. So when you combine all three of those, trackability, pushability, and trackability, you're able to go through like really like tight turns really easily. Exactly. Yeah, right. And then you're able to go even further into like side capillaries, acute angles, angles that again conventional devices would really struggle with.
And did I pick up that the trackability is because of these two rings?
These are more for visibility. So these are like typically they're made of like titanium, or they can be steel. It's just that so they show up on the scan when you're doing it. So when the surgeon is operating, they can see these two bands and see where the device is in the device. But I think it comes from its core. So its infrastructure is kind of made up of like different materials, and it's just the way you kind of layer them together gives you different strengths and bendability.
Okay.
But I can't disclose that. I'm sorry. I know it's very interesting.
That's very good. So I don't see any more questions coming in just now, so maybe that's the time to wind up. It's always a hard thing in a presentation like this to know how much to put into it, because it depends a bit on how many questions come in and so on. But what's really good is the clarity. What I'm getting from it is that, Johnny, that you've, as I say, you've done quite a variety of things. You didn't sort of just go slowly through one course and then slowly through a job, but you learned a lot of things on the way. And biomedical engineering, by its definition, is engineering in a biomedical sphere. So you're on the boundaries anyway, and unless you have experiences in different environments and with different products and with different physiological situations and so forth, then you don't move forward. So that seems to me part of it. And also your comments there about when people have asked, well, what would you recommend? Your recommend was keep moving. So that sounds definitely right to me. Move from one thing to another and get the experiences that are open to you. So is that a fair summary, Johnny, or is there anything else that you want?
Oh no, yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, you hit the hammer on the head, as I say.